Wait a minute. What even is this thing? This big, bright red wheel of death might look like something out of some awful horror flick, When Trains Attack. But what the heck is it even for? Well, what's up guys? This is Heis, and we are once again here at the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden, Colorado to talk about one of my favorite artifacts and how it operates, and talk a little bit about snow fighting along the way. That's right, because this thing is not just a giant wheel of death from a horror film, it's actually a giant wheel of death for snow, or poor Frosty. Welcome to Rotary Snowplows 101. But before we talk about the big spinning wheel of death, I think we ought to take a quick look at the other snow plowing methods that the railroads had before they built these giant things. So the first way that railroads actually tended to plow snow is one that you wouldn't really think about. This is just the pilot. We've talked about pilots before on the channel. Check out the video if you'd like. But if the snow is wet enough and sticky enough, the pilot actually plows snow just fine. You don't need anything more than this. But if it starts getting above the height of the pilot, or if it's not sticky snow, this doesn't work. Quite quickly, the railroads realized that they needed something more than just the plain pilot, and they developed plows that could be affixed to the pilot, something that's actually contoured up, something that's the full width, doesn't have any breaks in it. It'll push even the snow that doesn't really want to stick, or the bits of ice and all that other stuff. They developed plows to be put on steam locomotives like we've seen, but eventually most diesel locomotives later in the railroad also just got a pilot plow. They just come natively with this, ready to go, and can push everything out of the way when you come up across snow. But that wasn't the only problem that they had to solve. Certainly a snowplow or a pilot did a pretty good job of clearing the bulk of the snow out of the way, but railroad wheels have flanges, and you can't have the plow necessarily go all the way down to the rail, because if you have height changes, the plow's gonna catch. It might pick at a joint, might pick at a switch, and derail the train. So you couldn't really get clear to the rail. So we had to come up with a special other piece of technology called a flanger, or in many cases a spreader. There's lots of different varieties of these, to actually clear out the flange way so that the wheels could keep going. If the snow was light enough and not too dense of ice, a lot of times the flanges would just cut right through and it would be okay if you got the bulk of the snow out of the way, but a lot of times the mountainous railroads that dealt with a lot of snow, had to clear those flanges with an extra special device. This right here is Flanger OC, one of our Rio Grande pieces of maintenance of way equipment. The locomotives have a special valve in the cab to raise and lower this big blade using these air cylinders. And so they could drop this down and it rides on the rail and it'll scrape all that stuff out of the way as you're going down the tracks. And so with that, you could actually clear the flangeways for lighter locomotives, lighter services, all those sorts of things after a heavy, dense snowfall. And as well, the blade runs for quite a bit. It adds a little bit of width, so you get a little bit of right-of-way protection as well. Before we get to the rotary snowplow, though, there's one other interesting thing to talk about, and that is this big honkin' wedge plow. Now, you'll note that this isn't attached to a locomotive, although many times they were. This one is attached to just a big gondola. The gondola could be loaded up with all kinds of weight to help prevent this thing from derailing as they shoved it through the snow and cleared things. And this was designed for pushing out a ton of snow out of the way, obviously with how tall it is. I mean, I'm 6 foot plus in my boots, and yeah, that's a big plow. But the reason for this wedge plow's existence is really kind of an interesting transitory thing with steam locomotives and steam technology. A lot of the steam locomotives in the late 1800s, early 1900s had very small frames, and snowbucking was well renowned for ruining those frames. Take a look at these frames from Rear Grand Southern number 20. They also derailed her a bunch and rolled her over and stuff, so that's not just snow fighting, but engines that fought snow tended to have a pretty sad time. So many of the railroads said, okay, well, we'll just put the plow on something sacrificial like a gondola and keep our locomotives safe. But when this was not enough, we finally arrive at the rotary snowplow. Let's go take a look. And so we arrive at the rotary snowplow. This is the biggest and baddest snow clearing machine that the railroads had on hand. This one is Colorado and Southern Rotary Plow 99201. It was actually originally built to be used on the South Park line on the narrow gauge, and then it didn't fit through some of the tunnels and cuts and things, so they ended up putting it on standard gauge trucks and ran it on the rest of the CNS. This one, recently repainted by the museum. Love to see it freshened up. It's going to be lettered shortly soon, so it's painted unlettered at the moment. This one is a steam-powered rotary snowplow, though they did make diesel-powered rotary snowplows, and they actually are still even in service to this day. Union Pacific was ready to use theirs just last year. The steam team, Ed Dickens and crew, who do a wonderful job for the Union Pacific, actually had the rotary fired up and ready to go clear out the railroad amidst the big snows last year. I guess apparently they weren't really needed, but they were at the ready. And BNSF has one too up my way, up in the Pacific Northwest as well. Let's take an up close look at these blades on the wheel here. You can see that they're designed to cut through chip, ice, hardened snow, and you can see that they've run into a fair share of hard things over the years. This whole wheel spins, powered by a steam engine, later in many cases by a diesel engine, as we said. The wheel is about 9 feet in diameter. Some rotaries were bigger, some rotaries were smaller. You can see up top that there's actually an exhaust chute that when the snow enters through, it gets scooped past these blades and run through, forced up the wheel and out the top. So it shoots all the snow clear off to the side. And that chute can pivot, so it can go either direction. You can have the snow flung to either this side or that side, depending on which direction the wheel was running and which way the hood was set. Now, just behind the giant wheel of death, we have a series of inspection covers and maintenance hatches here. And this is where you can actually look in and see the engine. Let's take a look. In our first maintenance hatch here, you can actually see the crank and everything from the receiving end of the engine. And behind it, you can see that's actually the shaft that ends up driving the plow itself. So there's a huge gear case up in there. See if I can hopefully show it. I could barely reach with the GoPro here. But the steam engine is just like one you'd see on a locomotive, and it operates these giant wheels that then run to the giant gearbox to spin the shaft. Behind these hatches, you can see, yeah, it's just exactly what you'd expect in terms of a steam locomotive. We got wall shirts, valve gear, and everything. The slide valve cylinder set, just like you'd see on any older steam locomotive as well. One thing that's worth noting when we're talking about the rotary plows like this, in some parts of the world they did run themselves, but most of the ones in the United States weren't self-propelled. This engine is just to spin the wheel of death, and you'd have to shove on the back of this thing with more locomotives to actually ram it into the snowbanks, making true rotary operations quite the interesting thing. Now, I'm very fortunate in that I was lucky enough to participate in the charter the last time a steam-powered rotary was run in the United States at the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad back in 2020. I got some footage, and we'll probably just let that play at the end so you guys can see all the madness. But what a cool operation to deal with. Up above, you can see the smoke box and the saddle. A little bit different than a normal steam locomotive saddle in that the smoke box is ahead of where the engine actually is. But these hatches allow you to go up and take a look so you can see how this beautiful machine works. But that's what you can see on the outside. Let's go take a look inside. Well, hi. I always forget how cramped it is in here. So what we're looking at right now is the engineer's side of the rotary, and you climb up and you're right behind the engine that we were just looking at. And you're right next to the boiler. Up ahead is one of the cabs. It's kind of a multi-cab type deal. And up above, we have reservoirs for the air, our steam dome, where lots of appliances get their takeoff and our throttle lives. And then as we work our way around to Back here, the turret's back here, just like a steam locomotive, with all of its appliances ready to be turned on here. It's got multiple dynamos. I didn't realize that. Dynamo, injector, dynamo, power reverse, and the air compressor. So it really is quite the narrow car body, because they tried to fit as much boiler in here as they could to power that big spinning wheel up front. And so the car body couldn't be that much wider because you only clear so much track at a time. So, and of course this is a rebuilt car body. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the cab up front. So back here is basically what you would consider the cab on a normal steam locomotive. It has a back head, we've got a water column and sight glasses, and this is kind of the cab where the fireman would ride. This rotary plow is kind of like a deckless steam locomotive in the way that the boiler comes all the way out the back, and now we're kind of open here in the gangway. You can see as we look around that we're just open to the outside. Got our back head, fire door, butterfly door on this rotary. Got our sight glass. We got our pressure gauge and a blower valve. That's all you really need. Now, firing a rotary snowplow like this was kind of a difficult endeavor and usually involved multiple people. It'd be very common for them to have 2 firemen actually firing this, stoking the fire, shoveling coal into the firebox, because a normal steam locomotive goes chuff, 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 and the rotary works just as hard, but goes up. And so it drafts that fire insanely hot. So you're gonna be continuously firing, and it is a big firebox in there. And what's more is this tender only has so much capacity, and when you're clearing out a railroad, you might be spending a lot of time trying to make it to the next water tower. Thankfully, you have this thing called snow all around you. And so typically you'd also have some firemen's assistants or other crew members shoveling snow into the tender tank. Take a look at our tender here. You can see that it's all slope sheet for the coal to come down in here. And all that's water space down below, and up above is coal, and it's got a covered hatch so that you can open it to add coal, or you can keep it closed so that it doesn't snow or you don't blow snow onto your fuel to make combustion a little bit harder. It really was the common old practice that you'd shovel snow into the tender tank, and then you can blow back steam from the injectors. If you cause them to break open, you can force steam from the boiler into the tender tank to keep it warm. So that'd prevent your water from freezing in the winter and also melt the snow that you're shoveling in. You just make sure you want to use the nice clean powder and don't put any rocks or any of that other malarkey in there. All right, now let's walk down the engineer's side to the front cab. And it is interesting to note that many rotary snowplows actually had their operator back here. So the engineer, quote unquote, in charge of the plow itself and the engine might be mounted back here, sitting on a fold out seat just like that one. Or in the case of this rotary, he's up front. So lots of different folks crewing these things. When we get up at the front, just before the cab, this is actually the stack and the smoke box. And the branch pipes that are jacketed run to the engine right outside here. And that is about the width of one heist. So these would have been really hot. That would have been really fun to try and navigate through back in the day. Oh, goodness. Oh, not an easy door to squeeze through. But they also had nice egress right here for the crew up in this forward cab. So let's take a look, shall we? So up front here, that's one of the things that you can see is under restoration. Our windshields are actually blanked out, and they were blanked out by the railroad. And you can tell that this is a rebuilt car body because if you take a look at the shape of those windshields, you'll note that they're actually the same as the windshields in an F unit. Why make up something new when you could reuse something from EMD or maybe something that you had at surplus, right? So the new steel car body and using some other parts. But this is where the engineer would sit. I actually don't honestly know if he's properly called an engineer on a rotary snowplow or not. But this is the difference to the rotary that should be showing footage of with OY, where this is just where somebody who would be looking out and watching what would be going on would be hanging out, and the engineer would be back, again, by the side of the boiler on the engineer's side, running from back there. Very different. This is a little bit more modernized, a little bit more user-friendly. Now, going through the controls, it's actually about like what you'd expect on a steam locomotive. We have a power reverse lever right here. Our throttle is right here, mounted vertically, which is pretty cool. We have an independent brake, an automatic brake, and that way we can set up and stop the train, because ultimately the rotary is the boss. It was really important to communicate to the engines behind you who were pushing to stop when you ran into a wall of ice or something and needed to back out and clear the blades. We also have headlight switches. We have cylinder cock controls, and these actually have circuited cylinder cocks, which is pretty cool. Wipers, all sorts of fun to clear things up. And then our air pressure gauges. And then we have a large wheel here that's geared down to rotate our hood, so that if we're reversing directions, we can send the snow the other direction. On the back side of things, we get a nice view out. You can see the exhaust from the stack. You can see a nice CB&Q 5 chime back there. We have a handbrake down here, and then we have the linkage for the throttle, which runs up and above across the ceiling, which is pretty nifty. And then as well, you have whistle levers. Run back to the whistle, it's all disconnected. And then we have a manifold on the back wall here for all manner of different auxiliary purposes, being able to run an air hose, running the steam shroud, or running a water hose, depending on which valves you have opened up here. Also see that we have steam heat running all the way around the cab. Let's be real, if you're plowing snow in a rotary snowplow, it's not warm out. That about does it here for the front cab, and know that everything is still under restoration, and we're gonna be working on replacing the glass and all that stuff, so make sure you support your local railroad museums. When you've got 100+ pieces of equipment to take care of, everything needs its time and lots of money to put back together the right way, but I love seeing this thing painted. It's looking better than it's looked in years. And now let's go down the fireman's side. Ugh, if I can squeeze through here again. Here's your 6ET distributing valve for the automatic air brakes. Another branch pipe running down here, and a check valve for water to be put in the boiler there. And everything runs back, and you have more appliances to start on the turret, just as you did on the engineer's side. All right, well that about does it for a tour of a real rotary snowplow like we have at the museum. Why don't we take a look at one that actually runs? anyways, guys, hope you liked this presentation on snow fighting and the rotary snow plow. Hope you enjoyed, and thanks so much for watching. We will catch you all next time.
Frosty the snowman had a price upon his head. You know, I pictured a decapitation. That was some Gallagher stuff right there.
Yeah! That was very cathartic.